Hello, this is Mama Maggie Ward, aka Penumbra Mind. I'm reading the Huntsman of Adamos series, Book 1, The Huntsman's Honor. Lord Yurieth was the firstborn of the House of Adamos. He was destined to be a Master Huntsman instead of an oracle like his parents. A destiny that would take him from the forest of his family holdings to the battlefields of another world. The war would cost him friends, family, and almost his soul, but the greatest burden would be his own honor. The Huntsman's Honor. Prologue. Sons of Oracles. 1,128 years before the war oracle of Adamos traveled back through time and arrived outside the city of the kings. High Lord Adamos, the fourth in 50,000 years to bear the name of his house, carried his beloved Yillamina as she struggled in childbirth. She was the last oracle of the House of Yafriel, and possibly the last surviving priestess oracle. The temples of the light were falling to a stealth attack by their enemies, the Zolusian blood mages. Only the warriors of Adamos and Yafriel had answered the distress call of the temple, but the small houses were no match for the savage berserker warriors of the blood mages. The battle for the temple raged as the armies of the twin kingdoms fought for the ability to see the future. Adamos' uncle, the guardian Abel of the House of Adamos, and Yillamina's brother, the guardian Yurieth of the House of Yafriel, had ordered him to take Yillamina and flee through the vault of relics as they faced hopeless odds. The pair of guardians fought to give Adamos and his allies, the mage Lord Odinius and his brother, the oracle novice Odini, the fifth of the House of Odini, the precious time to carry Adamos in labor sealed one to safety. The mage Odinius had cast a spell to blow up the escape tunnel through the vault behind them and sealed them in. Suddenly, Yillamina screamed, "No!" Sobbing, she choked out, "Yurieth is dead, forever dead. They are taking his blood." Suddenly she gritted her teeth and growled out in animistic sounds between her pantings, "They're coming. Adamos, they're coming. I have to push. I cannot wait any longer. Adamos, come in here. There's water for her to birth in," called the young oracle Odini, who waved his hand. Oracle light appeared in the torch crystals. "Quickly, put her in the pools." "The pools of destiny? Are you mad?" Odinius gasped out. "It's blasphemy." "We have no choice. I read that the waters were healing, and we cannot lose the last of the Yafriel oracles," Odini shouted at his eldest surviving brother. There was the rumbling echo from high above them, and the cavern vibrated with the weapons of war detonating on the surface. Adamos looked down at Yillamina, who was panting in his arms. "My beloved?" "My lord, I do not know what the waters will do to our sons, but Odini speaks the truth about the healing power. Our sons and I will live, but the magic of the pools of destiny is unpredictable. It can affect each person who bathes in it differently. What it will do to a newborn, I cannot not say." She screamed out the last words as another contraction racked her body. Without hesitation, Adamos carried his wife into the sacred waters, which began glowing and swirling in tones of white, blue, gold, red, and green around them. Yillamina sagged in relief as the pain stopped. "He's coming," she gasped as she clung to Adamos. She bucked her feet out of his arms and arched her back impossibly. Then she curled to pull her first-born son from her heaving birth canal, while Adamos struggled, kicking violently to keep them afloat, after the floor of the pool dissolved from underneath his feet. He had no choice but to tread water as he held on to his beloved. "Help us!" Adamos called out as the water began swirling, healing gold, oracle white, and brilliant green. "Stop!" Odinius shouted, too late to halt Odini, who rushed in after Adamos. "Odini, no!" The pools pushed the youth away from the struggling couple and sucked him under the water in a magical whirlpool. Lightning flashed through the water, and Odini surfaced in another pool, choking and coughing. Odinius ran to his brother, kneeling on the edge. He reached out as his brother looked up at him through eyes that glowed with the swirls of magic. What is happening?" the younger brother gasped raggedly. Odinius could do nothing beyond holding the shoulder of his tunic. "Your magic is changing. Don't fight it. Just let it happen. Breathe, little brother." Suddenly Odini was pulled under again, and as Odinius leaped into the water, he found that it had solidified into an invisible layer like ice between him and his brother. The sacred waters swirled the white of oracles, but also the blue of warriors and the red of mages. As one knelt on top of the barrier, the other thrashed beneath. Yillamina's screams echoed through the cavern, and a baby cried in answer. Tearing his eyes from his brother, Odinius saw a baby floating on a swirl of green and white glowing water. The baby boy seemed content to let the water cradle him, and cried no more. Beyond the child, Yillamina and Adamos struggled through the birth of their second son. A burst of bluish-white magic water lifted the baby up into his mother's arms, and she cried in relief as she stood in waist-deep water, glowing gold and white. "Sons! We have sons, Adamos!" Suddenly Adamos was gone, sucked under. The water boiled with white magic of the oracles, the blue of the warriors, and blazed with molten red streaks of mage magic. Yillamina staggered to the edge and laid her second son on the stone edging before she lifted the first from the water, who only quieted his cries when he was laid next to his brother. Turning back to the pools, she looked desperately for her husband. The water swirled around her, and a single oracle stone floated to the surface in front of her. Before she could scoop it out with her hands, a finger of water flicked it out of the pool and onto her firstborn's chest, over his heart. She cried in relief that her son's destiny had not been taken from him. "Yillamina, help us!" Odinius begged. She glowed more brilliantly than Odinius had ever seen any oracle glow. "Give them back!" The power of her demand caused the pools to rush upwards and overflow. Odinius felt the strange surface crack, and he fell into the water with his brother. Adamos washed up next to his wife and sons. Odinius was shocked when he grabbed Odini and saw his hair had changed from the family auburn color to raven black. Odini's eyes still glowed with oracle magic, like he was having a vision. Pulling him from the water, Odinius demanded, "Brother, what is it? What do you see?" But young Odini just shook his head, sobbing. The 160-year-old curled into a ball against his eldest brother's chest and sobbed inconsolably. Another concussion shook the chamber, and rocks began to fall into the glowing pools. Several of the feathered serpents who lived in the caverns with the pools dropped into the waters from their burrows and began swimming away. "We must go now," Adamo shouted, lifting his wife and both his sons into his arms as Yellemina clutched the newborns to her chest. He felt stronger than he ever had. His magic had been changed. He was no longer just an oracle. He could feel the strength and speed of the warrior's magic flowing through his veins, and the power of the mages burning in his bones. He was a third-born, and would have been born a guardian if his uncle Abe had not still lived. Instead, he had been born an oracle, but now he was neither, and both, and something else. He strode through the tunnels with a new confidence and purpose. The pools had shown him a vision. In a century, more than 1,000 years, his youngest son would be born to be the greatest guardian of many generations, a guardian of guardians, the peacekeeper of the prophecies. At the end of the age, when the war oracle, with his grandson the uniting king, led the remnant against the powers of darkness, his youngest son would be the one to lead the celestial warriors in battle against the devourer and all that was profane. But for now, he had to make sure his newborn sons survived long enough to aid their brother who would be born in 1,000 years. Yellemina looked up at him. Her golden eyes reminded him of every beautiful dawn as she studied him. "You saw. For how long have you carried the burden of our family legacy?" She looked down at her sons. "Since my first vision at 82, I have known our houses would be the last to stand against the devourer with the grandson of Odini." "For 1,000 years? You did not have to carry the burden alone." Whispering, he pressed a kiss into her temple. "It was not your vision or your burden to bear." "We will not fail them," he promised her. "We will give them all they need to correct our ancestors' mistakes." He walked out of the tunnel and into the forest of the Northlands. Adamos and his uncle Abel had already decided that they may need to hide for a time, and the attack was the perfect excuse to disappear with their children. The king had allowed the attack as punishment for not turning over the ancient relics of the first people, and Adamos wondered if King Xerxes would regret what he had done when he discovered the Zolusians had killed all the oracles rather than capture them. Hours later, they sheltered in a forester's cottage in the dense woods of the northernmost territory of Adamos. Odinius and Odini were asleep in the loft. As Yellemina nursed her sons, Adamos laid an armful of wood by the fire and fed it a few more pieces. She handed him the eldest, and Adamos felt pride and worry bloom in his chest. "Mina, do you think the pools affected them the way they affected Odini and I?" His silver eyes held all his fears as he watched her rock the youngest. "I do not know. I've never heard of infants being put in the magical waters. It took my pain. It whispered to me to not fear for my children. The sacred waters placed an oracle stone over Yurieth's heart. Then it recognized me as High Oracle. That can only mean... She did not finish. They both knew the oracles of the light were all dead. Adamos, I am the last of my house, and so are you. Her tears were more than he could bear, and he pressed his forehead against hers with their sons between them. Not the last, my angel of light. Our children will not be the last either. Together they wept for all who had died, then laid down on either side of their sons and slept. One day later, at the temples of light, Regulus, guardian of the House of Adamos, led the counter-assault, and the battle was won, but Regulus was greatly disheartened. The oracles had been killed en masse, and their blood stolen for the abominable practices of the blood mages. 2 of his fellow guardians had died to protect the vault of relics, which had been blown up from the inside. King Xerxes strode through the destruction, fuming. Regulus, have any of the oracles survived? My king, we have not found evidence of the deaths of one of the oracles of Adamos, the youngest oracle of Yafriel, or the novice oracle of Odini. Regulus prayed they had not been taken to Seleucia. In his heart, he blamed his king for the catastrophe. Xerxes believed the Seleucians would not dare attack this place, which was sacred to both their peoples. But he was also angry with the oracles for refusing to let him search through their ancient relics for weapons of war. Regulus and his fellow guardians did not believe the Seleucians would respect the temples, so 2 guardians volunteered to stay at the temple under the pretense of visiting family members who were oracles at all times. Guardian Regulus, clean up this mess. Have the relics brought to my castle for safe keeping and study. We will make the ruins of the temples a memorial to the lost. Then you may return to your widowed sister. I understand she is expecting a son soon. King Xerxes' ability to dismiss the dead so quickly and focus on the wealth he had just gained almost had Regulus speaking against him, but instead he bowed, as my king commands. After the king flew away, Regulus let his disgust twist his handsome face. His milky jade eyes hardened with his rage. "Huntsman!" he shouted, and 2 from the House of Adamos approached him quickly. "There is an escape tunnel through this mountain. Find where it came out, and find me the survivors. Tell no one but myself or the guardians. We believe we have a traitor in the king's inner circle." The huntsmen were cousins of his son's cousins. The huntsmen were his cousins' sons, and loyal to their house above all. They bowed and jogged into the charred, shattered forest. "Guardsmen, prepare a pyre for the dead who did not go into the light with the oracles. Gather every bit of information, written or crystal stored, for return to the king's city. Leave the personal belongings for the families to claim if they wish. We will leave as soon as we retrieve the relics of the oracles." Regulus hated how callous he sounded, but he couldn't shake the feeling the king did not regret this attack, as he gained more power and prestige to move forward in the war. Xerxes was power-hungry, and had several times rejected the recommendation of the oracles to pursue peace with the Seleucians beyond the cessation of hostile treaties. He wanted to be king of both worlds, and he was willing to go to any length to make that happen, including letting their own world be invaded. That scared Regulus. He thought of what he knew of the sacred relics, and made a list of those which would not be found and turned over to the king. As a guardian, it was his duty to protect the kingdom, even from the king himself if he had to. Hours later, the Huntsman of Adamos came upon a forester's cot on the edge of the temple territory in the northlands of Adamos. The fire in the hearth had burned last night, but no one was there. They tracked the survivors to the river, where they disappeared after having gone into the water. There was no sign of them emerging on the other side. The huntsman assumed they must have gotten on a boat and traveled away. When Regulus got word from his huntsmen, he sent them downriver to the sea. The oracle Adamos, the young nephew of Abel, was a clever young man, politically savvy and wise beyond his 3,000 years. He was also an accomplished mariner. He would hide his pregnant wife and friends until he believed it was safe to reveal himself, a thought Regulus would keep secret. Regulus felt he needed to find and protect them, as a debt of honor to the two guardians who stood alone in defense of the temples. The berserker warriors, fueled by blood craving into madness, were extremely difficult to kill. From the evidence of the battle, the two guardians had taken down dozens of the bloodthirsty warriors before succumbing. They fought to the death, along with the entire warrior corps of the Temple of Light and all the warriors of Adamos and Yurieth. Regulus thought on all he knew of the guardians of Adamos and Yurieth and their family. Walking through the rooms that belonged to the joined oracles, an image caught his eye. Adamos and Yillamina on a sailboat, looking up at each other in love, but with Abel leaning on the rail beyond them, wearing a smug smile. His hands appeared relaxed as they were folded together. Regulus almost laughed aloud. Abel had left a clue only another guardian would know. Abel had sent his nephew and bride to sea, to the exact place Regulus suspected. After studying the crystalline image, he put it back among the others and ordered the rooms sealed. He would find them. He would help them with whatever they chose and turn over the most powerful relics to be hidden. Serving the light was more important than serving his king. The next chapter of the Huntsman's Honor is Chapter 2, A Boy and His Destiny. Thank you for listening.